everybody. My name's Rusty, if you don't know me. But so today we are starting our study on the book of there we go, Hebrews. So we're going to be studying the book of Hebrews basically through the rest of the year. So this is kind of our kickoff. We're just going to glide over the top of Hebrews to get a good look at it, to see what it looks like, how does it fit in the New Testament, what do we want to know about it, what do we want to get out of this study, all that good stuff. I have to say, we sang Poor Wayfaring Stranger today, watching poor John hobble up here on his knee. I have a little song, Ann and I write lots of little ditties together. And we do, I am a poor, decrepit husband. My joints are sore, recovery long. And then Ann will go, ooh. She'll do that part. We have, that's how you get older and you're like, yeah, everything hurts all the time. Oh, another knee surgery. Oh, okay, so. So we're going to be doing Hebrews. I wanted to get this out of the way. How does Jesus make his coffee? He brews it. It's best to just get this joke out of the way right now. And so if anybody else brings it up later, you can be like, hey, we've already done that. Just let's move on. So he brews it. So let's talk about the book of Hebrews. What comes to mind when we think about the book of Hebrews? So I wrote down a few things that popped to mind. One, there's just a lot of great, useful passages in the book of Hebrews. A lot of them that we've put, if you've been around a while, we've used them a lot in our faith. Hebrews 3:12-13, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has an unbelieving heart, or a sinful unbelieving heart, but encourage one another daily as long as... So that sense of a daily relationship, seeing to it that we're helping each other to stay healthy. In one of our Bible studies in Hebrews 4, verse 12, the word of God is sharper than any double-edged sword, dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from the eyes of him to whom we must give account. That's a passage that we've used a lot. A lot of us are very familiar with Hebrews chapter 11, a roll call of heroes of Old Testament faith. And in Hebrews 11:1, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And there's this list of heroes from the Old Testament who showed their faith and how they responded to God's calling and their different situations. There's a lot of great passages. Hebrews is also a really unique book just in the way that it's written and its topic. It's by far got the most Old Testament references and descriptions out of all of the books in the New Testament. I also thought it was interesting that Ken's going to be doing Romans. A lot like Romans, I think there's a little section in the middle that we're just like, I don't really know what those chapters are about. So, like, how many, passages do you have memorized from Hebrews 7 through 9? Probably not many, And Romans is kind of the same way that, there's that whole thing in the middle and then it gets to the good stuff at the end. Well, it's all good stuff, right? So we'll be digging into even those chapters. Hebrews 7 through 9 will be great. And we'll get more familiar with those. So a really common theme in the book of Hebrews is this word, therefore. And you know what happens when there's a therefore? There was some stuff before that that really triggers this whole discussion. And so that's one of my favorite passages in Hebrews. Therefore, Hebrews 10:19-22, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, opened for us through the curtain that is his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. There's a whole discussion that takes place before that, and that's that Hebrews 7-9. This is the therefore. It's a lot of good stuff, but it's really going to enrich your relationship with God to understand all of the before. Amen? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the details. When was Hebrews written? So most likely the book of Hebrews was written sometime in the late 60s AD. That's going to be after Paul's epistles, after the Gospels are written. There's only a few books, most likely, that were written after Hebrews, but probably written in the late 60s. The dates you see the most are like between 66 and 69. One of the reasons we believe that is because Hebrews contains a present tense referral to the sacrifices and the things that would go on within the priesthood. And we know that in 70 AD, there was a Jewish revolution, and the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem. And along with destroying Jerusalem, they burned down the temple. And so a massive change, because a lot of the Old Testament, how the Jews still worshiped and sacrificed, was done at the temple. And so that really changed a lot of things for them. But so in the book of Hebrews, it refers to that system, which the Christians didn't take part in at that point. But for the Jewish Christians, they still had, if you were a Christian and you had been Jewish before becoming a Christian, you still had lots of memories, probably, or family memories of that worship. And so, anyway, it'll get into that. But that's why we think the book of Hebrews was written prior to 70 AD. Let's keep going here. Who wrote it? This is like, nothing's going to change in your spiritual life if you figure out who wrote the book of Hebrews. But it's kind of fun to try to figure out and talk about. And so the big picture answer to that is we don't know for sure. And that's probably the only book in the New Testament that we could say that about. Everything else we feel, I think, pretty certain about in the New Testament. But the book of Hebrews is kind of a question mark. And you'll hear often that the most common guess to that is Paul. I'll tell you, I don't think Paul wrote it. And that's just kind of the easy answer. Maybe it was Paul. And then you can just kind of keep going with your life, you know. But if you read Hebrews, it just does not, to me, it does not have the ring of Paul. It doesn't sound like the way Paul wrote. It doesn't look like it did. So not to mention, if it was written in the late 60s, that'll be a problem, because Paul was executed somewhere around 67 AD or so. But anyway, Paul's a common answer. That was sort of the official position of the church for a long time. I'm talking about through the Middle Ages and that sort of thing. Other candidates are Apollos, because he was well-learned, Barnabas, Priscilla. I will just simply offer take this as Rusty's opinion. It's sort of a hobby almost. So if you want to talk to me about it, I'll gladly blab to you about my opinion on this. But I think it was Clement. Personally, I've done a little studying about it. Clement was an early church father. He has a letter that's First Clement. It's fairly well known among early church father writings. But anyway, that's just my opinion. And a lot of people don't agree with it. That's okay. The bottom line is it's a mystery. Most likely we won't ever know for sure unless something really amazing turns up, you know, but we're pretty far along in that process, so I don't know if anything is going to turn up or not. We may just have to live with the mystery. So, it's a mystery who wrote the book of Hebrews. All right, our next question. Why was it written? So, the primary theme of Hebrews is to encourage the church who most of its, at least it's directed towards an audience of Jewish Christians, okay? So, again, people had become Christians with a Jewish background. And it seems like, based on the thrust of the book, that there were a lot of Christians who were kind of looking back at the Jewish system, at the Old Testament, at the Old Covenant, and kind of holding on to some of that and holding on to some things in the New Testament. And so this is an encouragement to the Christians to not turn back to that old way of thinking. And there was a lot going on at that time, and we'll get into that here a little later, but it's to remind them that Jesus is better than anything from the old covenant. Jesus is not just a little better. It's not just a step up. It's not just a little better option. No. Jesus is the master of the universe, from chapter 1. Not like He-Man, but like, you know what I'm saying. Like, Jesus is supreme above all, and it's not close. Okay. And it's got some warnings, and in Hebrews 2:1 there it says, we must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. What a great, warning for us, because what's it like to drift away? Does it happen all at once? No, imagine the most easy thing to probably imagine is drifting away from shore, right? So, you're happy, you're hanging out in your little inner tube or whatever it is and having a great time, and you're waving to your friends on the beach, they're so jealous, I'm out here having a good time. And you start just admiring, or maybe you take a little nap, or I don't know what happens, but suddenly you start looking around and you're like, whoa, where's the shore? It just happens, gradually, because you're not paying close enough attention, because there are other things distracting you, because whatever. It's dangerous to drift. We've got to pay close attention to our faith so that we don't drift away. All right, I've got 4 different things to cover here in the book of Hebrews. Just 4 topics that I think Hebrews covers. So that first one, as I mentioned, is that Jesus is superior. Jesus is supreme. Jesus, and so it goes in Hebrews, it starts going through and comparing Jesus. Jesus is superior to the angels. A lot of times we talk about how powerful the angels were and the things that they did, and yet Jesus is superior to the angels. And in fact, he says that angels are actually ministering spirits sent to take care of us, basically, to help look after us, which is kind of a cool thought. Sometimes I think our society can get a little enamored with the idea of angels, but ultimately they're just sent to serve us. But Jesus is superior to the angels. Jesus is our high priest. In the Old Covenant, they had a high priest who was the only one who could go back and give sacrifices in the most holy place. Jesus is our high priest, and he's superior to the entire priesthood that was in the Old Testament. He also talks about how Jesus is superior to Moses. Moses was a great guy. This is kind of the language. He was a great guy, but he's no Jesus. Moses had a lot of great qualities, but Jesus, the covenant Jesus brings, is far superior to the covenant that Moses brought. The new covenant is superior to the old covenant, in part because Jesus is our high priest. So not just a little improvement, not just, good, we went from a 7 to an 8, with this new covenant. Great, we'll go with that improvement. Sounds a little better. It's like if you're trying to sell it to, somebody who's Jewish, hey, Christianity's a little bit of a step up, No. I mean, it is like night and day, the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. Let's see here. I love this. Down at the bottom there, you see in Hebrews 10:1, the writer says, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. You know, that idea of a shadow, I think, is really helpful. Let's imagine that Rusty and Ann are having, that's my wife, Ann. Rusty and Ann are having an outing in 110-degree afternoon weather in Phoenix, but we're outside and having a great time. And she walks around the corner a little bit. She comes back, and before Ann gets there, I can see her shadow coming around. I go, oh my goodness, look at that shadow. That shadow is beautiful. That is an amazing shadow. That shadow just shows me so much about my wife. You'd be like, I mean, it's a nice shadow, but Ann herself is so much prettier than this. There's so much more to her than just that shadow. I mean, the shadow gives you the outline. The shadow gives you an idea, but the shadow isn't even who she is and all of her awesome qualities and how good she is at things and da-da-da. No, it's just a pale comparison to the reality. The law is just a shadow. And this isn't to so you don't bother studying your Old Testament because it doesn't compare. We're not saying that. But we're saying, in a sense, in comparison to Jesus, in comparison to the new covenant, the old covenant is just a shadow. It's just giving us an idea of the awesomeness that we find in Jesus and in the new covenant. Make sense? We good? All right. Let's talk a little bit about what the setting was. This period of time, this was a tough decade. I was talking to somebody on the phone the other day, and I was just sharing, man, I wonder what it was like for Christians in the 60s. And, a few of us could probably speak to that. But the 60s, there was a lot going on in the U.S. of A. in the 60s. If you recall, there's JFK got shot, there's the Vietnam War, there was a civil rights movement. There was a lot happening in the 60s in the U.S. There was a lot going on. Well, for Christians in the 60s, 60s AD, there was a lot going on as well. So both Paul and Peter, the kind of top two guys, I don't know if that's how they would refer to themselves, but the most well-known Christian leaders of the church at that time, both killed somewhere wrapped into the persecution of Nero. And probably not a direct result of that persecution, but shortly thereafter, as tensions were high, let's say. But Paul most likely was beheaded. The reason he got to be beheaded, because he was a Roman citizen. That doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it does when you know that Peter, according to stories, was crucified upside down. And by the way, that's where we get our old Upside Down. Remember the Upside Down musical, everybody? Yeah. I'd sing a song for us, but if you never got a chance to watch that, it's worth watching. But anyway, Peter was, according to, not legend, according to, you know the word I'm thinking of, but anyway, we believe he was crucified upside down, and Paul was beheaded. So you're talking about the leader, the most important, the most influential leaders in the church, apostles, were both killed during that time as well. So the first sort of broader persecution came from Nero, who was the Roman emperor from 51 to 64, I want to say. right in there. But Nero was a little, he didn't have it all together. And anyway, the general, the prevailing theory is that there were issues happening in Rome, and there was a fire that started destroying a lot of Rome, and Nero decided to blame the Christians for that. And so that's when the first sort of more systemized persecution of Christians took place. Now, that was only in Rome. That was not everywhere. That would come later. But for now, it was just in Rome. So now you have Christians really being, questioned by the government, and they were being burned, and bad stuff happening in Rome. And then along with that, in Hebrews 8:13, it talks about, here, I'll just read that passage for you, and you can turn there if you like. In Hebrews 8:13, the Hebrew writer says, by calling this covenant new, he's made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. Which makes it sound like the writer knew that pretty soon Jerusalem was going to be history. Okay, and so what that might mean, this is just speculation, but it might mean that when the book of Hebrews was put together, there were already things happening with a move against Jerusalem. And so, and those were all events that Jesus talked about back in Matthew 24, I think it was, but where they warned, and so also, supposedly the Christians got out of Jerusalem because of Jesus' warning, like they cleared out of there before all the bad stuff really started happening. So, a lot of stuff going on. And then we find in Hebrews 10 and 11 and 12 some passages that seem to really speak to this idea of persevering through persecution, through difficult times. In Hebrews 10:23, he talks about holding unswervingly to our hope. A little later on, a few verses later, he talks about don't shrink back. Jesus won't be pleased with us if we shrink back, but we should live by faith. And then he goes into Hebrews 11 and that whole chapter about all of these heroes of our faith. And he says that as awesome as they were, they didn't get to see this amazing reward that we got, which was Jesus. And then in chapter 12, he talks about not growing weary. And he even talks about discipline. Like, no, it doesn't. I'm not sure if he's saying that, anyone was being disciplined, but he says that no discipline seems pleasant at the time. So strengthen your legs, strengthen your knees, old guys with knee surgery issues. Keep going, because there's a reward at the end. So, we talked about, there's a lot of therefores in view. So, Hebrews is full of these in view of Jesus being supreme, in view of the new covenant being superior to the Old Testament, in view of our faith. Hebrews urges us towards action, and there's a phrase that's really common in lots of passages throughout Hebrews. Let us. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest. Since we have a great high priest who's ascended into heaven, Jesus, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Lots of great passages urging us to faithfulness, to action. Let us, a couple of other ones. Hebrews 10 has like 3 in a row. Hebrews 10:22, I'll go next one. 10:22, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart, with full assurance that faith brings. The next passage, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. And there's more in chapter 12 and chapter 13. This idea, let us, not in the sense of, hey, would you mind letting us? No, let us, like, let's go. Come on. Get going. Here we go. Hang in there. You can do this. Get through this. That sort of let us. So, how do we want to come out and begin our study, or what do we want to get out of our study of Hebrews? So one is we want to come out of this study of Hebrews with a deeper appreciation for who Jesus is, what he's done for us, and that idea of, man, the new covenant that we live under is so amazing. This idea that we can approach the throne of grace with confidence. To John's point in the communion, who were we when Jesus came to us? And yet we can approach the throne of grace with confidence. It's good for us to have a deeper understanding of the old covenant and the new covenant and what that old covenant looked like. It's helpful to put the things in context when we're reading the Old Testament and understanding what they meant. And then third, I put just strengthened hearts to finish the race. And the closing passage here, it's probably one of our favorites, I think, or many of our favorites. Hebrews 12 says, therefore, and this is after 11, okay? He says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. The witnesses are all those people from chapter 11 who went through all of their trials, who made all those faithful choices and decisions. Since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We're in the race. If you're a Christian today, you're in the race. None of us, we just don't know how long that race is, by the way. So it's good to be running our race, but we need to fix our eyes on Jesus, right? That race can become distracting. We don't want to drift away in our faith. And so prayerfully, as we go through the book of Hebrews, it's going to help us to really deepen our appreciation for Jesus and really help us to finish that race strong. Amen? That's our sermon for today. We'll dive into chapter 1 next week with Ryan.